Every species in the galaxy had a tale of conquest, a record of civilization etched in the bones of dead worlds, in dated tablets buried under the dust of centuries. They were proud of their achievements, the Varnak, with their sentient AI, the Zithari, who bent black holes into power sources, the Kur, who moved planets like chess pieces across the stars. They gathered, as they often did, in the Great Galactic Forum, a place outside of time and gravity, where knowledge was exchanged and boasts were made, stories of victories, of dominion, of survival. But someone was missing, again. A low murmur passed through the chamber. "Except the humans," whispered a Thalco diplomat, adjusting his translator node. The archivist, an ancient, floating intelligence wrapped in light, turned slowly toward the center of the chamber. "Yes," it said, its voice resonating like the groan of a dying star, "except the humans, because no one ever told stories about the humans, not out of ignorance, not out of malice, but because their stories weren't told, they were feared. You see, the humans didn't arrive in ships, not at first. They arrived in whispers, in shattered outposts, in transmissions filled with screams and static. They came when the stars went dark in entire sectors, when mining colonies sent out distress calls that ended in silence. The first time the Galactic Council officially encountered them, it was already too late. A war was being fought, not declared, not negotiated, just fought. 100 ships lost in moments. The survivors spoke not of weapons, but of will. Of humans boarding ships without armor, tearing through warriors with nothing but their rage. Why? Someone once asked a captured human commander, a woman covered in blood and ash. She looked up with eyes like frozen oceans and said, "You hurt our children." They didn't understand. They still don't, because humans don't expand for territory. They don't fight for glory. They fight when pushed, and when they fight, they do not stop. The Varnak tried to calculate them, model their behavior. They failed. The Zithari offered alliances. The humans smiled, then vanished. 3 solar cycles later, the Zithari homeworld burned. The Kur, they begged. The humans forgave, and then quietly erased their moon. The Forum called it madness, brutality, but deep down in the dark places of their minds, they knew the truth. It wasn't madness. It was humanity. They are the species that burns brightest right before the dark. They love harder, laugh louder, and when grief takes them, it reshapes galaxies. The stories aren't about their weapons. The galaxy has seen superweapons. The stories are about what happens when a mother finds her child beneath rubble and screams to the stars for vengeance, and the stars answer. They are about a single soldier carrying his squad for 3 days through a toxic atmosphere, because no one gets left behind. They are about the silence after battle, when the humans bury their dead and yours with equal tears. And still, when they speak of Earth, they call it fragile. Blue, small, they are fragile, and that's what makes them terrifying, because fragility breeds fury, because when the rest of the galaxy evolved past war, past vengeance, past wrath, the humans remembered. They remembered what it meant to protect, to love, to lose. So in every corner of the galaxy, one phrase still echoes. No one knows exactly who said it first or when, but they all believe it. Everyone is welcome in the stars, except the humans. Because if the humans are coming, they're not coming to talk. They're coming because you made the mistake of thinking they forgot how to bleed. And worse, you made the mistake of making them care. Ask ChatGPT. There's a place in the universe where legends gather old, proud, and echoing with the stories of civilizations that rose high and conquered stars. They speak of power, of triumph, of bending physics and fate to their will. The Varnak whisper about machines smarter than gods. The Zithari talk of stealing energy from the heart of black holes. And the Kur, They moved planets like pieces on a galactic chessboard. They all come together in this sacred space, the great galactic forum where time pauses and history speaks. They trade stories like treasures, all except one, except the humans. It's always said softly, like something that shouldn't be mentioned too loud. Like a storm waiting on the edge of memory, no one tells stories about the humans, not because there are none, but because theirs aren't stories, they're warnings. The first time they showed up, it wasn't in ships. It was in shadows, in screams, in emergency signals that went silent halfway through. Whole sectors went dark. Colonies vanished, no declaration, no face, just aftermath. By the time the galaxy realized who they were dealing with, entire fleets were gone. Not defeated, dismantled. And then, when a human soldier was captured, they asked her why. Why such destruction? She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply looked at them and said, "You hurt our children." And in that moment, the galaxy understood. Humans don't fight for conquest. They don't rage for pride. They fight because they care. And when they care, there is no stopping them. You can calculate strategy. You can predict logic. But you cannot model grief. You cannot measure the fury of love turned to fire. They fight with everything, not because they're stronger, but because they feel more. And when they bury their dead, they bury yours too. Because to them, loss is sacred, even when it's their enemy. The other species call them fragile, emotional, small, but that's the part they keep getting wrong. Because being fragile doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. The humans remember pain. They remember war. And when the rest of the galaxy evolved past it, they chose to never forget. So whenever someone in the forum starts to brag about power, technology, fleets that stretch across systems, there's always someone in the corner who says it quietly. Everyone's welcome in the stars, except the humans. Because if the humans are coming, they're not coming for glory. They're coming because someone made them feel. And in that moment, the stars themselves begin to tremble. 1. The galaxy fears what it cannot understand, and that's the humans. While every species boasts about their power, humans remain unspoken, not forgotten, but feared. Their silence echoes louder than any war cry. 2. Humans don't arrive with speeches, they arrive with consequences. First contact wasn't a handshake or a message. It was screams, darkness, missing outposts. When humans show up, it's already too late. 3. One human sentence changed everything. You hurt our children. No threats, no weapons, just a mother's heartbreak, and an entire galaxy finally understood what it had awakened. 4. They don't fight to win. They fight because they feel. Humans don't chase glory. They protect. They mourn, they love. And when you hurt what they love, they unleash a fury no species can prepare for. 5. Logic can't predict rage born from love. The galaxy could predict wars, but not grief, not vengeance, not what happens when empathy becomes unstoppable force. 6. Fragility isn't weakness, it's the reason they're terrifying. They break. They bleed. But that very vulnerability fuels a fire unmatched by any superweapon. 7. Humanity doesn't conquer worlds, it haunts them. Their wars don't leave survivors to tell tales, only silence. And that silence lingers. 8. They bury their own, and their enemies even after battle. Humans honor the fallen, all of them, because even in wrath, they carry a soul deeper than space itself. 9. The galaxy evolved past war, but humans remembered where others forgot pain. Earth carved it into its DNA. And that memory fights back. 10. One rule in the Galactic Forum: everyone is welcome, except the humans, because if they're coming, it's not for conquest. It's not to talk. It's because someone made the mistake of making them care. Let me know if you want these points turned into a YouTube script, Instagram carousel, shorts caption, or anything else viral. Ready. The galaxy had long grown used to its rhythm, the rise and fall of empires, the quiet wars beneath treaty, covered smiles, the shuffle of power from one proud race to another. The Varnak, in all their crystalline wisdom, often opened diplomatic summits with tales of their AI that built cities faster than time could erode them. The Ker boasted their feats in gravitational engineering, dragging moons into perfect orbits like artists painting across the cosmos. These were stories meant to impress, to intimidate, to remind every listener of where the real power resided. But always, in every meeting, every chamber, every war story whispered in dim, lit bars orbiting dying suns, there was a silence that none dared to name. A hesitation, a missing thread in the tapestry of galactic pride, one that everyone noticed and no one wanted to pull, except the humans. It was always said under breath, half laughed but never quite joked. It didn't matter how vast your fleet was, or how ancient your bloodline claimed to be, when the conversation turned toward Earth's children. Voices got lower, and eyes grew distant, because no one truly knew what the humans were anymore. Their history wasn't logged in galactic archives like the others. Their first appearance wasn't announced by a beacon or a delegate ship. They didn't open trade routes. They didn't arrive on peace missions or in war flotillas. They just appeared, in reports, in wreckage, in whispers. At first, they were dismissed. Another primitive species with emotional volatility and carbon-based biology, not worth concern. But then the disappearances began. Mining colonies on the fringe gone, not attacked, not captured, just gone. Transmissions cut off mid-sentence. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. When survivors did finally crawl back from the edge of nowhere, they didn't speak of battles. They spoke of eyes that didn't blink, of humans who didn't scream in fury but moved with quiet, surgical rage. They spoke of people who looked at death not as a threat, but as an old friend they'd already met and weren't afraid to see again. You could track a fleet's path by the echo of destruction it left. You could chart war by the scars on maps. But with humans, there was no path, just absence, just aftermath. The Council tried to contain the rumors. Exaggeration, they claimed, psychological trauma, mass hysteria. Because to acknowledge that something so small, so late to the galactic table, could create that kind of fear, it shattered the hierarchy they'd all agreed to believe in. But fear has a way of seeping through cracks. You'd hear it in pilot lounges, in the way veterans passed flasks and locked eyes in long silence, in the way commanders would shuffle uncomfortably when their students asked, "But why don't we have any treaties with Earth?" It became a superstition the kind people pretend not to believe in, just in case it's real. And still, not a single formal encounter, no embassy, no warning, just ghosts and wreckage, until the day one was captured. She was pulled from the ruins of a Ker ship, her body bleeding, her armor scorched, but her grip still clenched around the throat of the Ker general whose vessel she'd taken down alone. They brought her in like a trophy. Strapped, scanned, sedated, she didn't resist, didn't speak, not until one diplomat, flanked by translators and flaring his throat sacs in superiority, leaned in and asked, "Why? Why do you destroy what you don't understand?" And then she looked up. Her voice was calm, not angry, not trembling. "You hurt our children." That was all she said. And in that instant no one laughed anymore, because it became clear, terrifyingly clear, that this wasn't about power. It wasn't about territory. Humans didn't come with fleets to impress. They came like storms, quiet, sudden, unstoppable, and not because they were the most advanced or the strongest, but because they were the most driven, fueled not by dominance but by the unbearable gravity of love and loss. See, the other species evolved by suppressing emotion, by perfecting calculation. But humans, they remembered. They carried their grief like armor, turned their fear into fire. They didn't wage war out of hunger, but out of heartbreak. They didn't destroy out of greed, but because someone had crossed a line they held sacred. And when they cared, they didn't stop. That's what the galaxy couldn't understand. Not then, maybe not even now. The horror wasn't in their weapons. It was in their why. Because when humans decide, something really decided. Not even the stars can stand in their way. Every galactic race had their myth of invincibility, until Earth made them remember what it feels like to be prey. That's why no one speaks their name in pride or derision, only in caution, in whispers, in regrets passed from admiral to cadet. That's why when the roll call of civilizations echoes through the galaxy, one is always missing. Because no one tells stories about humans. They tell warnings, and that's why the most repeated phrase in every corner of the known universe still echoes with one truth. Everyone is welcome in the stars. Except the humans. 2/2, they'd captured her after the battle, what was left of it. A single human woman, pulled from the rubble of a warcruiser that had once been the pride of their fleet. The hull was torn apart like paper, emergency lights still flickering as if the ship itself couldn't quite believe it had been brought down. No one knew how she got in, no boarding craft, no strike team. Just her. They expected her to scream, to spit defiance, to roar like the wild thing they assumed she was. But she didn't. She was quiet. Her face was cut, bruised, armor cracked, one arm shattered. And yet her eyes were still in a way that made even the guards uneasy. She let them strap her down, let them drag her to the interrogation chamber. Even when they taunted her, called her primitive, accused her of war crimes she hadn't committed, she didn't react. Until the diplomat leaned forward, smug, gleaming with superiority, and asked the question the entire council had been dying to know. Why? Not why they fought. Not why she'd infiltrated a flagship and left it smoking in orbit. No, he asked why they destroy what they don't understand. There was a long silence, the kind that stretches so tight it starts to hum, and then she looked up, slowly. Her face didn't change, her voice didn't rise. She just said it, soft, simple. You hurt our children. No accusation, no fury, just truth. And in that moment the room changed. The guards didn't breathe. The diplomat's throat sac dimmed, because that sentence didn't land like an answer. It landed like a sentence. You hurt our children, not soldiers, not territory, not resources. Children, and the cure for all their power, their politics, their planet. Bending arrogance finally realized what the humans were. They weren't conquerors. They were protectors. Guardians of something deeper than policy, more ancient than war. When humans fight, it's not for empires. It's for people, for love, for family. And when that's threatened, they don't come to debate, they come to end it. That sentence spread through the galaxy faster than any fleet, faster than light. You hurt our children. It played over and over in intercepted recordings. Echoed through back channels, whispers in war councils. Officers who thought they'd faced every kind of enemy paused at that line, not because it was angry, but because it was final. No one had ever said it like that before. Because no other species felt like that before. Most civilizations had evolved to tame their instincts, to suppress emotion, but humans had never forgotten it. In fact, they embraced it. Love, loss, loyalty, they carried those things into battle like weapons. And when you take something precious from them, they don't demand compensation. They don't send envoys. They come for you. That diplomat, the one who asked the question, resigned later that cycle. Rumor says he never recovered, couldn't sleep, said he kept seeing her eyes, hearing that sentence in his dreams, "You hurt our children," and the worst part, she wasn't even angry, she was mourning. That's the part the galaxy never understood, not at first. Humans don't go to war because they want to. They go because something inside them breaks, and when it does, the thing that rises from that broken place is not mercy. It's not fury either. It's something colder, more determined, the kind of vengeance that doesn't burn, it freezes, it calculates, it finishes, and it doesn't stop until the threat is gone. That's why they don't negotiate once they've made up their minds. That's why their wars don't pause for politics. That's why their enemies don't get second chances. Because when you hurt what they love, especially the innocent humanity, doesn't just respond. They remember, and they make sure you do too, forever. You hurt our children. That wasn't just a reason, it was a warning. And the galaxy has never been the same. It took the galaxy too long to understand the humans. They weren't like the others, not orderly like the Zethari, not coldly logical like the Varnak, not calculated and self-preserving like the Kur. Every other species, when faced with war, moved like a machine. Efficient, predictable, rational, but the humans, they didn't fight to win. They fought because they felt, and that changed everything. You could track most armies with algorithms, predict battle movements, strategize based on resources, terrain, advantage. But the moment you added humans to the board, those equations broke. Not because they were more advanced, they weren't. Not because they had better tech, in fact, they often didn't. They won because they cared more than anyone else was ready for. A Varnak general once said in stunned retreat, "They're not fighting for orders. They're fighting like someone took something personal, and someone always had." Because for humans, war isn't a tactic. It's not about proving superiority or gaining control. It's about one thing. Something or someone they love is in danger. And when that's true, they become something the galaxy couldn't simulate, couldn't understand, couldn't stop. The battlefield wasn't where they showed strength. It was where they revealed soul. When a human squad was cornered on the frost world of Vefra 6, every strategic calculation said they'd retreat. 10-1 odds. No air support, no exit. They didn't run, they held. For 11 hours, they fought without rest, without supplies, through blizzards and broken bones, because one of their own was trapped beneath collapsed ice. She was alive barely and calling for help. They refused to leave her, not because a commander ordered it, not because protocol demanded it, because she was one of them, and that was enough. When the Zethari tried to broker peace after orbital strikes, vaporized a human medical vessel, unarmed, marked, clearly non-combatant, the humans didn't sit at the table. They didn't send negotiators. They sent silence, and then, months later, without warning, an entire Zethari fleet vanished in a span of 7 minutes. All that remained was a beacon, one message repeated in dozens of languages. You don't get to say sorry after this. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was grief, refined, weaponized. The galaxy kept trying to understand it, to name it, to contain it. But there's no formula for the way a human breaks inside when someone they love is taken, and no defense against what they become afterward. You can teach a soldier to fight, but you can't teach someone to fight like a human does when they've lost something precious, because that kind of fight doesn't come from training. It comes from pain, from memory, from a promise whispered through teeth clenched in the dark. I won't let this happen again. And when they rise, when they move, it isn't to win medals or glory or power. It's to make sure no one else feels that same pain again. You'll see them cry in bunkers, laugh too loudly after battles, hold their comrades like lifelines. You'll see them take hits to protect strangers they met hours ago. Because in their hearts, even in war, they're always holding on to something. To someone. That's why they fight like no other species can. Because it's not about war. It's about who they are when they care. So when you hear the stories, when you see the smoldering ruins of a fleet, and wonder what kind of weapon could do that, know that the weapon wasn't made of steel or plasma. It was made of love. Love twisted by loss. Love sharpened by betrayal. Love that refused to die even when everything else around it did. That's what makes them terrifying, not their rage, but the unstoppable force that only exists because they feel so deeply. Because once a human cares, really cares, and you take that from them, they won't stop. They can't. They'll cross galaxies, burn through stars, tear through fleets, and not because they want to destroy you, but because in that moment they have nothing left except the fight. The generals of the High Council couldn't understand it. For centuries, they had mapped the battlefield of the universe in predictable terms: numbers, logic, strategy. They believed everything could be calculated. Everything had an equation, even war, especially war. They knew the mass of ships, the output of weapons, the limits of morale. They could model every move before it happened. But then came the humans, and suddenly the equations failed. Entire simulations collapsed under the weight of something the computers didn't know how to measure. Not firepower, not tactics, not resources. Grief, love, wrath born from loss. That was the thing no algorithm could predict: the sheer, unquantifiable fury of a species fighting not for power, but because their hearts were breaking. They tried to understand. They really did. They fed in every variable: terrain, numbers, fatigue, fuel, and still the humans did what no one should have done. They charged into impossible odds. They held positions for days with no supplies. They broke through walls they shouldn't have touched. And they won again and again, not because they had the advantage, but because something inside them refused to accept defeat. The models couldn't account for it. The logic didn't hold because it wasn't logic. It was loss. A Zithari war analyst once wrote, "A wounded human is dangerous. A grieving one is something else entirely. That's not strategy. That's a storm wearing a face." You could shoot a soldier. You could destroy a fleet, but how do you kill a memory, a promise, a voice echoing in someone's soul saying, "Don't let them get away with this"? You can't. And so the humans kept coming. No matter how heavy their weapons were, their heaviest weapon was always the thing they carried inside. The memory of a brother who didn't come home, the face of a daughter lost in the blast, the whisper of a friend bleeding out, saying, "Go, finish it." What military planner could measure that? How do you graph a broken heart that turns into a blade? The other species, they had soldiers, brave ones, skilled ones, but when their strategy failed, they retreated, they folded, they recalculated. Humans, they dug in, sometimes with weapons, sometimes with their bare hands, sometimes with nothing but the refusal to stop breathing until the job was done. And when asked why, they never quoted orders. They never mentioned honor. They didn't say duty. They said names, real names. Because every human in a fight was carrying someone who couldn't fight anymore, and that changed the war. You could count ships, you could count troops, but you couldn't count the ghosts following every human into battle. And every ghost was a reason. That's why humanity doesn't need to scream to be terrifying, because their silence means they're feeling, and the deeper they feel, the harder they hit. So the analysts eventually gave up, stopped trying to predict them. Instead, they just warned, if you take something from a human, not a city, not a colony, but something they love, you better hope you have a place to hide, because grief doesn't follow logic. And neither do the people who carry it into war. You can't predict the fury of a heart that's been broken, and that's what makes the humans unstoppable. The galaxy had a habit of underestimating humans. It was easy to do. They looked breakable, their bones snapped, their skin tore. They didn't have scales or exoskeletons, no extra hearts, no natural telepathy or acid for blood. Compared to the hardened, evolved, and battle-forged species of the cosmos, humans looked like they didn't belong anywhere near a battlefield. And that's what made them terrifying. Because fragility, it isn't weakness, it's fuel. You see, when most species encounter loss, they retreat, they rebuild, they calculate, they adapt. Humans, they ignite. There's something about a creature that knows at all times how easily it can die. Something about being made of soft flesh and fragile hopes that makes every heartbeat feel like a declaration. I'm still here. And when someone threatens, that when someone pushes them far enough, that fragile body becomes a weapon fueled by something no shield can block. Conviction. No armor is stronger than the reason they stand back up. The Varnak, in their crystalline superiority, once mocked a wounded human soldier during peace talks. The man had lost an arm in combat. The Varnak delegate, glittering with artificial pride, said, "You are a race built to break." The human just smiled and replied, "Yeah, and we keep breaking through." That line spread like wildfire because it was true. They do break, they bleed, they cry, they mourn so loudly the stars themselves seem to pause in sympathy. But then, they rise, and when they do, they rise changed, more focused, more furious, and far, far more dangerous, because pain doesn't make them weaker. It gives them purpose. Their fragility teaches them something the rest of the galaxy forgot long ago. How precious every breath is. How sacred every bond. How priceless every person. And when one of those is taken away, they don't just get angry. They remember. And humans don't forget pain. They carry it, fold it into themselves, shape it into resolve. So while others laugh at their soft bodies and fragile lifespans, humans train harder, fight longer, love deeper, lose heavier, and when they lose, they come back stronger. That's why they never truly lose at all. Because every scar is a map of where they've been and a promise of where they'll go next. So go ahead. Call them weak. Call them soft. Call them mortal. But don't forget what happens when something mortal decides not to die quietly. That's when you see what fragility really means. It means they've lived through fear. It means they've learned to endure agony. It means they've stared death in the face and kept walking. Because fragility is not a flaw. It's the reason they fight like hell. It's what makes them human, and that's what makes them unstoppable.